Well, I met my wife on February 17th, 2002. Now, I know that date because that's Michael Jordan's birthday, February 17th. It must be God. Now, I met her, I saw her, I didn't really have the courage to talk to her too much. A month later, we crossed paths and we began to kind of serve together. And later that summer, she went back to Arizona. Her name's Sarah. I call Arizona now Sarazona. I was given the chance to speak at a camp in Arizona, so I said, sure, this is awesome. It happened to be about 2.5 hours away from Sarah's house, but I told myself, this is the time that I'm gonna tell her how I feel about her. Now, every guy who's ever experienced the nervous vulnerability of sharing your feelings knows what I'm going through. So I pre-planned it. We're gonna go to this awesome Mexican restaurant, this little ghost town called Cave Creek. We went there, it was amazing, and then I drove her to this hill where there is this fountain that was supposedly like the largest fountain in all of the world. I had burned a CD of our favorite songs. Remember those days? And it's like playing and it's just right. A fountain's going up. My song is on. I get the courage. I look at her and I just say, I like you. I don't know how to say it, but I like you. And friends, guys, you know what this is like, right? I mean, it's now to her. She has all the control in the world, all the power of my one and only heart. And in this moment, when I declare those words, she doesn't say anything. It's just quiet. And I decide I'm gonna wait her out. And it starts to rain. And I'm like, really, God? Thanks. And it's pouring rain. And she then says, I don't know how to kind of put words to what I'm feeling. And I was like, oh, you just did. I turned the car on and I'm like, I can't believe this. How did I read this wrong? I drive home. The rain is coming down so hard. It's like a monsoon in Arizona, and I have to drive to her house. And to get to where her parents live, it's about 1.5 miles through this dirt road. The road has basically been washed out, so my van is barely getting there. I drop her off. I try to get out of the driveway, and my van gets stuck. And I'm like, you have to be kidding me right now. I walk to the front door because I don't want to be a creepy guy who just got rejected, sleeping now in their driveway. I don't want to be that guy. So I walk to the front door, I knock on the door, and their dad opens up. And I'm like, my car got stuck. I'll sleep in the driveway. Do you have a blanket? He's like, no, come on. We've got a guest bedroom. You can sleep in there. I'm like, thanks a lot. So then I'm in this bedroom all by myself. Hopefully you're feeling for me right now. And I'm just like, I can't believe I am stuck here. And then all of a sudden, about 10 minutes later, I hear a knock on the door. And I'm like, it's probably your dad going, I heard you struck out. And like, I'm just sitting here going, why, God, why? And in the moment I open the door, and it's Sarah. And Sarah has this in her hand. And I don't have very many possessions that mean very much to me, but this would probably be at the top of the list. And she said, I didn't know how to answer your question, but maybe this helps. And she hands me this, and you know my wife, she's an artist. She's really deep, really discerning and prayer-oriented. And I opened this up, and it was 50 to 60 prayers that she had just been praying over me. Not praying that we would get together, not praying any kind of like motive that it was all about, as I read them, God, would you use his gift? Would you build his character? Would you train him up in you? And there was verse after verse after verse. And I read this. I didn't grow up in a Christian home. I didn't know that people prayed like this. I thought I was being courageous, saying, I like you. And she had been praying for me. And at the end of it, I get done with this and I'm like moved to a place, and the only thing that can come to my mind is, so does this mean you like me? She's like, I think so. I say this because today I want us to win in our marriages. And I know for some of you here, you are single. For some, you might be newly engaged. Maybe for some of you, you've been married for a number of years. Maybe you're just starting out. Maybe you recently have gone through a really difficult end to a relationship. Wherever you are on the spectrum, I know that I'm going to be speaking about marriage, but any of these concepts can meet you where you are at. Today, I want to talk about how we can reset our marriages, how we could fight for our marriages. And I want to bring us back to Genesis chapter 2, a verse that many of you probably know. The Bible says this: that is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. I love this concept, right? The sense of dating. Maybe for some of you, you're in this dating relationship right now, and there's gonna be a moment where a man and a woman, they're gonna leave their family narrative and they're gonna begin this journey, and the scriptures say, of becoming one flesh. Now, this word one in Hebrew, it's one of the most fascinating words. It's the word echad, and it literally means whole. No fracture, no splintering, no brokenness. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is God, the Lord is echad." The Lord's one. He's not multiple, broken off entities. No, he's one. Even when you get to the Trinity, you realize it's three in one: Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It's one. And the concept of marriage is where two become one. And what I want you to understand this is when you get married, it doesn't mean that they became one. It's you are becoming one every day. Your dating continues after your marriage. Your pursuit for each other continues, because every day it is a journey of fighting for oneness. I love what Ephesians 5:21 says: submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And the end of Ephesians, you see Paul writing about marriage. And his view is quite simple. It is mutual submission. Two people submitting to each other in reverence to Christ, because Paul understood that Christ was the groom, that the church was the bride. And when you study Paul's writings, you realize what Christ gave up. Christ was so submissive to us that he was willing to die for us so that we could experience grace and truth and peace and access to his Father. And the same quest is for us, that we would be submissive to each other, lifting each other up in reverence to Christ. But I want to take this even a little bit farther. If you ever flip through the Gospels and you study the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, you realize they model this. The Father will look at Jesus and say, "This is my Son, in whom I love and in whom I'm well pleased." He'll talk about the beauty of the Spirit. Jesus will say, "I only do what I saw my Father do." He'll talk about, there's someone greater than me that's coming. He's talking about the Spirit. The Spirit would honor the Father. The Spirit would honor and illuminate the teachings of Jesus. There is this mutuality of submission and lifting up the other, and the same must be true in marriage. What scholars would say is this is what the ideal is. And if we are going to be the kind of community filled with the kind of marriages and dating relationships, we must fight for oneness. And we do this, first off, by naming our ideal. I remember listening to Andy Stanley speak a number of years ago here on this stage at a global leadership summit, and he was talking about how he and his wife had to answer this question regularly. What is our ideal? What's God's ideal for us? And I know many marriages that don't know the answer to that question. They might know somebody else's ideal. They might know what their parents' ideal was, but they've never declared it for themselves. Do you know what that is? Maybe you're in a dating relationship right now. You ought to be having these conversations. What is ideal for family, for schedule, values, for church? When you can have an honest conversation, you get clarity. And clarity is a gift. And the best, healthiest marriages who are fighting for oneness, they can name their ideal. When's the last time you talked about that? With your spouse, with your significant other? When's the last time you really wrestled through this? This is critical for a healthy and flourishing marriage. The second way that we must fight for oneness is that we have to name our desire. Name our desire. Now, maybe many of you were in your chair time this morning. I hope so. But I probably can't imagine that many of you weren't in the Song of Songs or the Song of Solomon. This book, 8 chapters, could not be read by Jewish boys and girls because it was too sensual. It was too real. I'm just going to read you some of this. I want you to feel. This is what a man would speak to his bride, what a bride would speak to her husband. It's filled with powerful, sensual poetry. Just hear this. Chapter 4, verse 1. The man says, "How beautiful you are, my darling. Oh, how beautiful." Sounds like a country song. I love it. "Your eyes behind your veil are doves. Your hair is like a flock of goats descending from the hills of Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of sheep just shorn, coming up from the washing." Now, to us, not so much. Back then, when's the last time you told your wife, "Your hair is like a flock of goats, babe"? Your teeth are like sheep who have just been shorn. It's probably not gonna work. But I want you to understand, when you flip through this book, it was about a man speaking to the beauty, to the heart. He saw his bride. And you see this bride speaking to her man, affirming and calling out what she sees. It is powerful. My question is, when's the last time you've done that? I was talking with a mentor a number of years ago, and I just said, man, it feels like the conversations around desire, around intimacy, around sex in our culture has just, man, it's off the charts. It's so unique. And my mentor said, there's typically 2 camps when it comes to this conversation. You see it on media. You see it with culture. It's more animalistic. I was like, well, what do you mean? He said, if you ever think about it, in the creation story, what came before man and woman are animals. And animals, they can't control their desires. They see something, they want it, they go after it. Their desires control them. I know this firsthand because when I lived in Orange County, in downtown Fullerton, the downtown area is filled with cats. There was this cat that lived outside our house, and every 3 to 4 months kept getting pregnant. And finally, we had named this cat. We gave it little milk and stuff. But finally, I just sat down with the cat, and I was like, buddy, you can't do this. You can't be treated this way. Please. And then 3 months later, same thing happened. Cats can't control. They don't think like this. They go into heat, and stuff happens. But you look at our culture, there's many people who are living like animals. And we talk about sex like that sometimes, more animalistic. But there's another group of people that I think, to be honest, can be just as dangerous. My mentor said they're people who act like angels. It's like, what do you mean? They're people who denounce their physical bodies. I was like, whoa. He said, when it comes to desire and intimacy, there's so much shame attached to it. So they stuff it and they never talk about it and they never kind of lean into it. And they just kind of push it away. They feel like it's awkward. They don't know what to do with it, or they've had a bad experience with it. And there's just so much there that they just try to denounce any sense of desire that's with them. And to be truthful, often with their kids, or with, there are these kind of moments where it just leaks out. And there is just this, they kind of shift to becoming more animalistic. And he goes, there's gotta be another way. And the tension of being fully human is choosing not to let our desires control us and not shaming our desires. When you are fighting for oneness, you are choosing to be fully human. You are choosing to talk openly and honestly about what does intimacy, what does sex, what does desire mean for us in our marriage. It is important that we be those kinds of people. You look at 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7, it says, in the same way, you husbands must give honor to your wives. Treat your wife with understanding as you live together. I love this because the Bible will say, hey, our job when we live in submission to each other is to lift up and bring honor to each other. Work in a way in which you understand each other's needs. What intimacy really requires is two people who understand each other, who honor each other. Paul writes about this in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and he was single. Like many of you here, he was single, but he would go around the ancient Near East, planting churches, meeting with married couples. He had seen many times what the culture and how that had influenced the marriages. He had pastored people towards a better way. Here are these words from 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Now getting down to the questions you asked in your letter to me. First, is it a good thing to have sexual relations? Certainly, but only with a certain context. It's good for a man to have a wife and for a woman to have a husband. Hear these words. Sexual drives are strong, but marriage is strong enough to contain them and provide for a balanced and fulfilling sexual life in a world of sexual disorder. I feel like someone was writing that just for today. The marriage bed must be a place of mutuality. The husband seeking to satisfy his wife, the wife seeking to satisfy her husband. Marriage is not a place to stand up for your rights. Marriage is a decision to serve the other, whether in bed or out. Abstaining from sex is permissible for a period of time if you both agree to it, and if it's for the purposes of prayer and fasting, but only for such times. Then come back together again. Hear this. Satan has an ingenious way of tempting us when we least expect it. Understand, commanding these periods of abstinence, only providing my best counsel if you should choose them. What's he saying? You have to fight for oneness. And that there is an enemy who does not want you to be one. And I know many of you in this room, you desire emotional connection, intimacy. And you're not getting that. And the enemy goes, it's easy. I can get that for you. Just open up the computer, go to a chat room, go start connecting with someone that you used to go to high school with. And all of a sudden, people are falling into the trap of emotional affairs. Some people, their drives. And they want connection, physical connection with their spouse. And they're not getting that. And the enemy's like, it's great. I can get in there. And all of a sudden the temptations come. And it can lead to a computer. It can lead in a number of different areas. And all of a sudden that oneness begins to be fractured and splintered. And that's what Paul's addressing here. And if you can't name your desires, friends, it's not healthy. The best couples I know, they fight for this. There's a couple, I'm not gonna tell you which service they go to. It's this one. And there's a couple, I won't say which section they sit in, it's over here. And a couple of months ago, they came up after a service. They're in my line, they were right down front. The guy looks at me, he's standing next to his wife. He's like, we've been married 46 years. 46 years. And she still loves me. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. And he's like, and it's never been better. And I was like, what do you mean? And her cheeks got so red, and he's like, it's just awesome. It's awesome. And there was this moment at first where I was like, this is weird. And then all of a sudden I was like, no, this is awesome. And I looked at them and I was like, thank you. Thanks for being an example. Thanks for talking about this, because it's so easy to be animalistic or to be angels and shame it. No, be human. I was with one of my favorite Willow couples. We were in the Middle East together, and at every holy site that we went to, she would walk to her husband and go, come here. And he would walk over, he's like, and she would grab his cheeks and she would just kiss him. And we were in Lazarus' tomb where Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead. And she's like, come here, babe, come here. And I was like, this is amazing. I love it. Why? Because here was a couple who wasn't uncomfortable with desire and intimacy. That's what the world needs to see, friends. Can you name your ideal? Can you name your desires? Healthy couples, strong marriages, they talk about this. They're fighting for oneness. The third way that I think you can fight for oneness, first is ideal, second is desire, number 3 is discernment. What do I mean by this? I want to take you back to the Old Testament. There was a rich, powerful man. He kind of ran this little city, this little village. He was married and he had power. And outside the city, David was there. Now, David wasn't king yet, but he had his soldiers, he had his army. They were kind of resting, and they were waiting, and by them being there, were protecting the city. Well, one day they got a little hungry. They ran out of supplies, and so David looks at some guys and says, hey, go up and see the rich guy. See if he'll give us some food. We've been helping him out. Maybe he can help us out. So the servants walk up to him and go, hey, man, you've been so good to us. We've been trying to protect you. Any chance you might provide us some food? And the rich, powerful man goes, I'm not giving you food. And then begins to hurl insults towards the men and towards David. The servants go back to David and they're like, hey, we didn't get any food. David's like, what? And that guy was really mean. That guy was a punk. He said terrible things about you. And David was like, are you kidding me? Come on, guys. And they get their swords on and they get ready to go to battle. Now, here's what happens. The wife of the rich, powerful man gets wind of this and goes, oh, are you kidding me? He did it again. I can't believe he did this. She runs to the pantry. She grabs as much food as she can. She runs out to David and she says, I'm so sorry for what my husband said about you. It's not fair. It's not right. Please take this food, feed your men, but be kind to us. I'm really sorry. This woman, Abigail, is an amazing woman. She goes back to see her husband, Nabal, this rich, powerful man, and he's throwing a party. And he is inebriated. He is drunk, and so she